I want to start by telling you how I got to what I'm doing now. So this started when I was working on my PhD dissertation. And I needed to find a topic. And one of the problems is that when you work on your PhD, one of the things that they tell you is a good dissertation is a done dissertation. Because only 25 to 31% of people who start the dissertation would actually finish it. The second thing that they tell you is actually a question. You know how you call a person that met the requirements for the dissertation by fraction? Doctor. And so I started working on my dissertation. I started thinking about topics, and I met with my mentor, and my mentor was different. And he said, you know, I expect more from you. I want you to work on something that's going to be meaningful. I want you to work on something that would change your life and the life of others. It was a pretty high order. And I started thinking about topics, and he kept on pushing me and probing me and prodding me. And I was getting increasingly annoyed with him. And at some point he asked, you know what, let's try this. What pisses you off? And at that point I wanted to say, well, you. But I didn't. At that time, I had already worked for startup companies. I started my own startup companies, bought companies, sold companies. But at that time, I was working for Texas Instruments, a company with 35,000 employees, where the CEO tenure is typically pretty long. Guess none of you heard the news. So I worked for Texas Instruments, very large company, and I said, what pisses me off is why are people so much more creative when they work for startups than when they work for mature companies? I'll lower this a little. And there was quite on the other side, and he said, I think we have a topic. And so I worked on that dissertation for 2 years. I researched the question, why are people so much more creative when they work in startups than when they work in mature companies? Took me 2 years, found the answer, wrote my dissertation, 348 pages, defended it, got my doctoral degree, and we went to the graduation ceremony. So we went to the graduation ceremony. My daughter, she was 9, my younger daughter, she was 9 at the time. I got my degree. We came back home. She had a friend over for a play date, and her friend asked her, so where have you been this summer? And Shira said, we went to Minneapolis to my father's doctoral graduation ceremony. So her friend asked, oh, so your daddy's a doctor? And Shira thought about it for a second and said, yeah, but not the useful kind. So I can't heal people. I tried prescribing medications. The pharmacies don't take them. So I focused on creativity and specifically innovation. Here's my why. I truly believe that every company has the potential of being the most innovative company in the world. I used to think that this is limited only to startups, which is why I love startups, but it's not. Every company can be the most innovative company in the world. This is where I'm coming from. Now, I have 3 disclaimers or warnings to you. One is in the next hour and a half, or less than an hour and a half, you're going to be drinking off a fire hose. So beware. The second one is, it is what it is. I'm not going to tell you that, as long as you celebrate innovation, you will be innovative, because you won't. I'm going to tell you what it would take to really be innovative as a company. The last thing is I get distracted easily. So if I get on a tangent, just let me know. Okay, here's our agenda. I'm going to talk about, first of all, if we are going to talk about innovation today or innovation culture, we need to start by defining what innovation is. I want to talk about why this is important. Why is it important to you? It's all about resources. Innovation is all about resources. It's also all about technologies. It's all about the processes, and it's all about the culture, and it's all about something that I can tell you right now, and I will tell you about 40 minutes from now. So let's start. Peter Drucker said that a business has only 2 roles, and it is innovation and marketing, or marketing and innovation. If you think about it, it also has sales, which is implementing marketing, and it also has execution, which is implementing innovation. But in the basic, it's marketing, and innovation. Now, what is innovation? Innovation does not have to be only a new product. It can be a new product, service, process, business model. If you look at a company like Uber, Uber did not invent the taxi cab. They invented a new business model. A lot of companies only invented new business models, and yet they are very innovative. You can invent a new process. The type of innovation that we're most fascinated with is what we call the radical innovation. And to probably give you a good sense of what radical innovation is, help me by finishing this sentence. Those who live by the sword are shot by those who don't. I didn't make this up. This was Gary Hamel. Think about it. It's those who change the rules of the game, and that's radical innovation. Why is innovation important? Surveys showed that companies that are innovative have 6 times the market share, 6 times the revenue, 3 times the profit, and do 50% better during recessions than the average company. Is that compelling enough to be innovative? Yes, it is. In fact, another research showed that if you took 2 companies and you normalized their profitability for year 1, by year 5, the innovative company will have 5 times the profit of the average company. Another study showed that the link between the number of inventions or innovations or ideas per employee to the profitability growth. And as you can see in the blue line, you can see that there is some kind of a link, but in the red line, you can see how this link works at the lower number. So if you take the number of ideas that come in a company divided by the number of employees, because obviously there are going to be a few employees with more ideas and a few employees that are completely dry. But if you divide the number of ideas by the number of employees, they multiplied by 1,000 to get a number, you will see which company has the highest potential for profitability growth. So one last thing to say, it's a numbers game. It's a numbers game because another study showed that for every 1 successful market launch of a product, process, business model, or service, there were 3,000 ideas and even more in the pharmaceutical industry. 3,000 ideas, which means for every 1 successful one, there are 2,999 bad ideas or ideas that never got implemented. So it's a numbers game. Well, one of the things we're going to do here today is we are going to create an innovation policy manual. How many of you want to have an innovation policy manual that assures innovation? Okay, everyone I can see. So we're going to have this policy, and just to start, because we know that innovation is very important, then our policy will start with the company must be innovative more than 80% of the time. I just drew an 80%. The company shall excel in execution, and the company will gain highest market share. Can I write this as a policy? Yes, I can. Is it worth the paper it's written on? No, it doesn't. Okay, let's agree that you have to put resources into it. If you want innovation, you have to put resources into it. We all know that when Google went public, they filed in their IPO letter, the CEO letter to the IPO, they said that they have this 20% time. They call it the Google time. We're going to give every one of our employees 1 day a week to come up with new ideas, new products, new business models. That's how we're going to be innovative. So a lot of people use this example. We're going to give our employees time, or we're going to build an innovation lab. Here's what they don't know. Article after article after article, and even my article that said, this is not working anymore. Google does not do it anymore. They do variations of it, but they don't do it the way it used to be initially. Why? Because it was not working as good as it should have. Well, how important are resources? Do you know any of those people here? The one on the left. Let's start with the one on the left. His name is Samuel Piedmont Langley. You know what's named after him, right? Yeah, no, that's another Langley. Anyway, nothing is named after this Langley. But thanks for trying. So Samuel Langley was the head of the Smithsonian Museum, the Smithsonian Institute, back in the late 1800s. And he received $50,000 grant from both the Smithsonian Institute and the Department of Transportation to build the first heavier-than-air manned flying machine. By December 8th of 1903, his last attempt failed, and this is where he gave up. He had $50,000. $50,000 back in the late 1800s was a lot of money, but he wasn't successful. I guess by now you know who the other two on the right are, because it wasn't 9 days later, at the same year, on a budget of $1,000, that they did build and successfully flew the first heavier-than-air manned flying machine. And that's why we have Southwest Airlines and American Airlines today. It wasn't the money. Let's take another example. The Boston Consulting Group every year ranks the most innovative companies in the world. Look at who's number one. Ever since they started in 2005 and up until this last year, 2017, and just the 2018 survey did not come out yet, Apple was number one, the only company consistently in the same place, and it is the first place. So Apple is the most innovative company in the world. Let's see. In 2005, that was the first year that the Boston Consulting Group ranked Apple as the most innovative company in the world. I want you to look at those numbers. They grew their revenue in 1 year by 68.3%. Now, 68%, just so that you get it, it's not of $100,000 the previous year. It's of $8.3 billion. And they grew 68.3% in 1 year. Their profitability grew almost fivefold by 383%. Their investment in R&D went up 9.2%. In fact, as a percentage of revenue, it went down. How about 2017? By 2017, they have a new logo. They're growing 6.3% in revenue. They grew 5.8% in profit. Their investment in R&D went up 15%. Between 2010 and 2015, their investment in R&D grew more than 30% every year. And there were a couple of years where they grew more than 40%. Their investment in R&D kept on going up. 25% for a period between 2008 and 2016. So the question is it about the R&D budget? It's not. It's not the R&D budget. Here's a story that a lot of people like, and this is a garage that was located on 367 Edison Avenue. It was owned by Dr. John Spencer, who later became the mayor of that city where this garage is. This garage was part of his house. Well, there was a professor in Stanford, his name was Frederick Terman, and Frederick Terman had this crazy idea of let's motivate our students to start businesses. And he motivated two students, David and William. David and William decided that they're going to start their own company. And so they rented this garage from Dr. Spencer. They rented the garage, and at that time, actually, Dr. Spencer, because they were using the garage, separated the two entities. So the house now got number 369, while the garage remained 367. And now David and William received an investment from Dr. Terman. The investment was $538 in 1938. $538 to go and start their company. They had an idea. Go start your company. Here's $538. They needed to decide what would be the name of the company, so they flipped a coin, and they decided to use their last names. And after flipping the coin, actually, Bill got to have his name first, and David had his name last. So Bill Hewlett and David Packard started HP in that garage. And we look at this garage as people consider it. It is actually a National Register of Historic Places. It is listed there. And this is considered the birthplace of Silicon Valley. But they got an investment, right? They got $538 back in 1938. And $538 in 1938 today would be $9,000. This is it. It wasn't $10 million to start a company, it was $9,000. And just like the Wright brothers on $1,000, it's not about the R&D investment. It is about motivation. So it's not the R&D resources, it's not resources in general, it must be about technologies. And if you want to be successful today, if you want to be an innovative company, you have to deploy at least one of those icons there. You need to deploy artificial intelligence, computer learning, machine learning, cybersecurity, fintech, blockchain. Who here does not have blockchain on their plan yet? I mean, you must. Not to mention robots and bitcoins and Internet of Things, of course. We must do something on Internet of Things. You have to drones. How did I forget drones? So you have to deploy one of those if you want to be an innovative company, right? You must. I remember life used to be so much simpler back in the late 90s. I lived in Silicon Valley. And really, if you wanted to be successful, all you needed is just to add a .com to your name. That's it. And we know how that ended. So one more thing that I'll just mention quickly, if you know the Gartner hype cycle, we tend to overhype every technology. You know, right now it's blockchain. Blockchain can do everything. It really can do everything. Unless you really understand what it does and realize if it's really applicable to your business or not. Technologies go through this cycle. And there are a lot of technologies up there at the peak of heightened, inflated expectations. So it's not about the technologies. I know what? It's about the processes. So we have all kinds of processes that we use. We use design thinking. We need to have hackathons, right? Adam, we must have hackathons, because when we have hackathons, that's when we come up with the best ideas ever, and that's when companies start and fail. Crowdsourcing, great, agile, Scrum, they're all those ideas, they're all those processes that we need to deploy in order to be innovative. So let me say something about the technologies and the processes. When I joined the Plano Chamber of Commerce a few years ago, I met someone, and we had the orientation meeting, and when we met, we exchanged business cards. His name is John, and John gave me his business card, and he said, "Hi, my name is John. I'm a photographer. I take great headshots." And I told him, "Oh, cool, so do I." And he asked me, "So are you a photographer?" And I said, "No." I served in the Israeli Defense Forces, 35th Airborne Paratroopers Brigade. I trained as a sniper. And this is some of my equipment. This is a high-power 308 rifle, long-range rifle. These are some of the medals that I actually got. This is high-quality match-grade ammunition. The question is this: if I give you those tools, can you make a 1,000-yard shot? The answer is yes. You're not going to hit the target, but yes. You're not going to have a headshot. You're going to hear a large bang, and we're going to go find where the bullet went. The reason is because it's not enough to have this top-end equipment. If you want to take a 1,000-yard shot, even with the best ammunition that you have, here's one of the smallest things that would affect your accuracy. The earth moves. And if you're going to take a shot going due east, due west, as the earth moves, the bullet is going to hit 8 inches above the head, just because the earth moved while the bullet was traveling 1,000 yards. There's so many things in the environment and the climate that would need to be right for you to make that shot. So it's not about the processes, it's not about the technologies, and obviously it's not about the investment in our research and development. And I'm going to use one last analogy, I promise you, but I'm going to be very consistent with this one. We're going to use the analogy of an iceberg. Not that kind of iceberg, this kind of iceberg. So when we look at innovation, it's really the tip of the iceberg. Most of the iceberg is underwater. Anybody has any idea what percentage of the iceberg is underwater? Everybody says 90. And you're actually pretty correct. 8.3% of the iceberg is above water, 91.7% of the iceberg is below water, and that's what I found. That innovation is above water, and there's 91.7% that's below water. To set this up, I need to explain the relationship between two phrases, innovation and creativity. Innovation is really the output. Creativity is an idea that comes to our head. And implementation takes that idea and turns it into an innovation of a new product, process, business model, or service. So when I look at this, innovation is an organizational function. Implementation is an organizational function. Creativity is an individual function. But for the first two, both the creativity and implementation, there needs to be something that lets you make that 1,000-yard headshot. And here comes the statement that did not come from Peter Drucker. I know that people think that it did, but as it turns out, I did my research and it did not. I don't know who it came from, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I want to show you a quick video.
It is a stunning scene that passenger yanked from his row, his lip cut, dragged off a United jet for refusing to give up his paid seat. Tonight, a Chicago aviation security officer involved here put on leave. But so many are asking, how could this have happened? John Clausen in the orange shirt saw and heard it all.
After having done really nothing other than say, this is my seat, I bought and paid for it, I need to go to Louisville. I could not believe what I was seeing or hearing. I was in shock.
United Airlines told passengers the flight was overbooked, now says it was a crew transport issue. 4 seats needed to get a crew from Chicago to Louisville. $800 in vouchers offered, no takers. So United's computer picked 4 passengers, including the 69-year-old man who said he was a doctor and had patients to treat. Come on. The man slipped back onto the jet before he was removed again. United CEO calls it an upsetting event and apologizes for having to reaccommodate these customers, but no direct apology to the man. The overbooking, even demanding a paying customer give up a seat, is perfectly legal.
It's part of
Pay attention.
a document that nobody ever looks at called the contract of carriage, which gives basically the airlines, the pilot, the flight attendant, all sorts of rights to pretty much do whatever they want.
It wasn't the contract. When you bought the ticket, you knew what you're getting into. You knew that that was a possibility. Maybe you didn't know, but you did approve it. I know we have someone from Southwest Airlines. We had someone from American. You know, I really need to check and make sure next time I do this that there's nobody from United. But since nobody stepped up, I figured we didn't. What did United do to fix this? Well, they changed their policy. One of the changes they said is from the moment that you cross the threshold from the jet bridge into the airplane, you will not be removed from the plane. We can still remove you if you're sitting at the gate. And then one day I read, stay with me. I read a statement that said, I read a story, and the headline said, Southwest Airlines removed the passenger from a plane. And the first thing that came to mind was, really? Southwest Airlines? No offense to American. The nicest airline ever, they removed the passenger from a plane? And I read the entire story. And here's what the story said. The plane had left the gate. All of a sudden, he turned back to the gate. The flight attendants asked one passenger to follow them to the gate. She got off the plane. At the gate, they told her, call your husband. She called her husband. As it turns out, her husband was trying to call her before, but she already had her phone off because they're about to take off. And her husband said, our son, 24 years, in Denver, had just suffered a head injury. So the gate transmitted that statement or that incident to the plane. The pilot decided to turn a $60 million plane that cost $7,000 an hour to operate back to the gate because he felt that was the right thing to do. By the time she finished her phone call, Southwest Airlines had booked her on the next direct flight to Denver, sent all of her stuff, arranged for transportation and accommodation free of charge. Southwest Airlines removed the passenger from her plane. It's a little different story. See, that was for you. It's a little different story. And by the way, this is a licensed picture. And so to figure out what really is happening, then I saw that, I looked at the mission statements for the different airlines, and here's what I found. United Airlines, every day we help unite the world by connecting people to the moments that matter the most. We're all about the passenger. Delta Airlines, helping more than 160 million travelers get to the places they want to go each year. Still about the passengers. American Airlines, we're dedicated to make every flight you take with us something special. Your safety, comfort, and convenience are our most important concerns. It's all about the customers, except Southwest Airlines. On their About Us page, a statement from the CEO, who I was honored to meet last week, Gary Kelly. Our people are our single greatest strength and most enduring long-term competitive advantage. That's on their About Us page. That's on the top. Nothing about the customers. And yes, there are statements about customers. But here, they recognize that we need to create the right climate for that pilot to say, I'm going to turn a $60 million plane that costs $7,000 an hour to operate because it's the right thing and I'm not going to get punished for it. That takes us to innovation culture. And I want to tell you another story. This is a technology story, and this story actually is mine. This goes back to 2005. In 2005, when I joined Texas Instruments, that was 2002. I joined Texas Instruments, and back in Silicon Valley. My office was up in Santa Rosa. It was a 100 miles commute in each direction, which frankly I loved. And my wife, as soon as I joined Texas Instruments, asked, are we going to have to move to Dallas? And I said, no, that's not going to happen. And she said, but what if they offer you to be a general manager of a business unit, but the business unit is here in Dallas, and so they need you to move? And I said, you know, there are hardly people who know me here in Dallas. 1 year, 5 months later, I get a call from the ranch here, and they said, we combined a couple of business units, and we need you to be the general manager. So we moved to Dallas. We actually moved to Plano. And I started running the business unit. I did that for about 1.5 years. And after 1.5 years, my boss decided to send me to the Center for Creative Leadership to make me a better leader. And after about a week, the end of that week, you sit with a psychologist, and the psychologist would tell you, would go and analyze everything and you know, would give you advice on what you should be doing and how. And she asked me, what would be a good question to frame our conversation? So how about this? You worked in startups, you started startups, now you're working for a very large company. How about this question? Are you a startup person or a large company person? And I said, there's something else that bothers me even more. Am I a leader or an individual contributor? And she said, that's a good question too. So let's frame our conversation around this. So we framed it. We talked for about 2 hours. After 2 hours, we had the graduation ceremony. I got on a plane. By the time I landed in Dallas, I knew what I had to do Monday morning. Monday morning, I went to my boss and I said, I don't want to run the business unit anymore. I want to be the strategist for the group of businesses that we have. And so first of all, she was very understanding. So first of all, she said no. And then she thought about it a little more. In a couple of days, I kept on pushing this, and I told her, you know, this is where I'm going to bring the most value. And she said, but who's going to take over the business unit? And I was fortunate enough that 2 of my people, I kind of groomed them from day one to take over my place one day. And I told her, these are the 2, and just take any of them. And so she chose one, and I started mentoring him. My preferences was the other one. He's still a systems manager in Texas Instruments. She rose up to be a senior vice president in the company. But so I handed over the business unit to him, and I started thinking about the future. And I started doing trend analysis and what would the future be, the future of technology and the future of specifically connectivity, which was our unit. And one of the things that I realized was that we're going to have a lot more content, we're going to have a lot more capacity, and the bottleneck is going to be this USB cable that goes between your computer and your peripheral. And so I looked at at those trends, and I realized USB 2 is not fast enough. So there must be a USB 3, and maybe we're going to be first. The thing is, everything USB starts and ends with Intel up in Hillsboro, Oregon. So I got on a plane and I flew over to the USB people at Intel. And I sat with them and I asked them, are you going to do USB 3? And they said, no. Why not? I mean, here's the case for it. We're going to have more capacity. We're going to have richer content. Why not? And they said, we're going to do external serial ATA. I told them, look, not all laptops are this size. They're smaller devices, and people don't want yet another connector and no backward compatibility. We need to do USB 3. And I couldn't convince them the first time. I flew in the second time, couldn't convince them the second time. The third time, Pat Gelsinger, who used to be the CTO of Intel at that time, he poked his head to the room and he asked what was this about. I told him my share, and he said, you know what, this makes sense, let's go do this. So we're going to do USB 3. Well, the people in the room, the Intel people in the room said, well, we don't have the resources for this. And I said, oh, don't worry, I have the resources. I had nothing. I was no longer a general manager at that time. I was an individual contributor, which is what I wanted to do. But that meant that I had no resources. So I went to my boss and I said, hey, I just came back from this meeting. We have the opportunity to be the first with USB 3. And she said, I can't make that call. I said, all I need is 3 engineers. I need him, I need her, and I need him. Those 3 can put a demo together, and I promised Intel that I'm going to come back with a demo in 1 month. She said, you should have made that promise. So, but you have like 260 people working for you. She said, I need an approval of my superior, a senior VP in the company. Fine, let's get this. I know I can convince him. So can you schedule a meeting? Yes, I'll schedule a meeting for us. So she schedules a meeting. An hour later, she calls me. She says, we had a meeting. When's the meeting? Meeting is at 11 a.m., September 5th. We're in July. This is 6 weeks out. She said, well, that's the first opening. I talked to his assistant, and this is the first opening that he has. Do you mind if I try? Be my guest. So I went to his office. He has a suite. His assistant is sitting behind the desk, and his door was open, so I kind of could see that there was nobody in the room with him. I just didn't know if he was on the phone or not. So I asked her, is he on the phone? She looks at her phone, at her console. She said, no, he's not on the phone. So I walked straight to his room. She jumps out. She tries to stop me, but guess what? She has to go around her desk, and I have a straight shot in his room. So I'm straight into his room. We opened the door, knocked on the door, got in my head there, and said, you have a second? And he's like, sure, what? I said, we need to talk about this USB 3 thing. He said, I thought we scheduled a meeting. I said, yes, this is in September. We're in July right now. This is 6 weeks out. I promised Intel that we're going to show them a demo in a month, which is before September. And, he looked at my numbers. I showed him a business plan for $533 million. I showed him that, and he goes, do we have a customer for it? If I had a customer, we're already late. Nobody knows that there's going to be a USB 3. We're the first people to know that there's going to be USB 3 because we just sold this idea to Intel. Come back when you have a customer. Can't tell you how deflated I was at that moment. So I went home and I decided that I'm writing my resignation letter. Except I have a rule. And that is never write resignation letters in the evening, always write them in the morning when you're fresh. So I went to sleep, I got up in the morning to write my resignation letter, but as it turns out, when I got up in the morning, I decided, you know what, I'm not writing my resignation letter, I'm doing USB 3 instead. So I went to the 3 engineers that could put this together, and I told them, I need you to work on USB 3. I need you, and I need you to work on USB 3. And they said, you don't have to convince us, just tell our boss. If she tells us to do it, we'll do it. So, well, here's the problem. She said no. I went to her boss, and he said no. So here's the deal. You're the only ones who can make it work. It can't come at the expense of your day job, because this is not sanctioned. You can't tell anyone because you'll get in trouble and I can't bail you. What I didn't realize is to engineers, that was value proposition. They wanted to get in trouble. They wanted to work on this black project. And so we started working. About 3 weeks later, we got on a plane, we flew over to Oregon, we showed Intel how we run 10 gigabit per second over a 14-foot USB cable, and the rest is history. There are 4 billion USB 3 ports shipped every year, probably even more this year. Was there an R&D investment in this? No. Did we deploy any unique technology? No. Any special process that we used here? Well, kind of. It's called ignore your boss, which is not really a formal process that companies use. Somehow we had something there. We had the right culture. So here's what happens to companies. Companies, what I found in my research, in my 2-year doctoral dissertation research, what I found was the companies start, and this, by the way, is the answer. When somebody asked me, why do companies, do people feel more creative or are more creative in startups than mature companies, I used to hate when people would say, so what's the answer? Oh, what do you mean? I worked on this for 2 years, I published 348 pages, you want me to give you just one sentence? Actually, what I found is I can give them just one word. Innovation culture. Okay, 2 words. It's culture. And what I found was that as companies grow, whether it's in revenue, size, number of employees, just years, they lose this culture. And unfortunately, when they cross this line of viability, of point of no return, they start shrinking. And unfortunately, what happens is because they're not innovative, their revenue declines, more likely their profit declines because the products are not competitive, so now it's just competing on price, narrower margins, and expenses always lag the drop in revenue. And now we're starting to fire people until we cross that viability line, unfortunately, in the wrong direction, and this is when we close. Culture is made of 2 things: leadership and teamwork. And so I like this map that kind of tells you where you are in the organization. You are here in the red. There is teamwork. Teamwork is the work that you do or the interactions that you have with people at your level. Leadership is what you show the people who report to you. And followership is what you show your boss. So we have vertical, we have horizontal. If we go back to our iceberg, then we have leadership and followership, and then we have teamwork. Let's go back to our policy manual. So since we know that it's important to have good leadership and good teamwork, then we're going to put policy 2A and 2B are going to say leadership must be effective, productive, and creative, and teamwork must be effective, productive, and creative. Can we write this policy? Yes, we can. You're catching on. Is it worth the paper it's written on? No, besides we do everything electronically these days. Let's start with organizational climate. So back to our iceberg, we're going to separate. Now we're going to talk about things that are specific to leadership and followership and to teamwork, so vertical and horizontal. The first one is climate, and under the leadership and followership, we're going to talk about autonomy and accountability. Teresa Amabile is a great researcher of creativity in organizations, and she wrote this: creativity thrives when managers let people decide how to climb a mountain. They needn't, however, let employees choose which mountain to climb. Think about this. Autonomy does not mean go do what you want to do. Autonomy means this is what we need from you. Figure out how you do it yourself. Here's a challenge question for you. What do you do when one of your employees comes to you and says they tried something without your approval and failed? What do you do? Can't tell you how many people say, don't ever do this again. This would look really bad on your file. Next time, ask first. All of those kill creativity. The only one thing that does not kill creativity is saying, okay, you know what, here's an idea. You know her over there from Associa? She tried something like this before. I don't know exactly what the story is, but talk to her and see what she did. Maybe there's something that you can get from it and save whatever you're working on. And if not, you know, that's fine. It's not the end of the world. You need an employee, that employee, to leave your office and think, well, that wasn't the end of the world. This is another quote from somebody else describing bureaucracy. I like his quotes. Bureaucracy is the overuse of process, policy, and formalization to gain power and or replace individual common sense. This is what we do with policies. We write a policy when we cannot have common sense. United Airlines solved that problem with policy. Southwest Airlines didn't have to because they had common sense. Still have common sense. He gave us, everybody at Influence 2018, he gave us a $100 card to fly on Southwest Airlines. So I'm going to fly on Southwest Airlines. There is reciprocity in climate. If you give employees autonomies, you will get accountability. If you don't give employees autonomy, if you give them bureaucracy, what you're going to get is CYA. And you know what CYA is. It's reciprocal. That's the word, yes. English is my second language. Back to our iceberg. On one side, the leadership followership on climate, we have autonomy and accountability. On teamwork, we have our ability to conduct constructive conflict. And here's another story. So one day I went to eat at an Einstein Brothers. And as I was sitting there, I heard two sitting by the window, and they were arguing. Now, they were Israelis because they were arguing in Hebrew. And other than them, I was the only other person in that restaurant that could understand what they're talking about. And they started raising their voices, and they started using their outside voice. And they were starting to yell at each other, and soon I saw that people started moving away from them. There was this demilitarized zone around them. Nobody wanted to be anywhere near them. Of course, nobody would tell them, hey, shut up. You know, there are people here. No, everybody just walked away. At some point, they realized they caught themselves and they started lowering their voice. But what I knew was that even though they were very passionate, they were using very loud voices, this was not personal. These were not personal attacks. And I heard them say, oh, this is a stupid idea. I didn't see the other person saying, taking this personally or being offended by it. That is constructive conflict. A few years ago, I was asked to deliver a keynote in a conference about Israel. And the question that I needed to answer was, why is there so much innovation coming out of Israel? So I told the Einstein Brothers story, but I had to think about why, is there anything special in Israelis that would let us be able to have this kind of constructive conflict? And the answer is yes. See, we have mandatory military service. Everybody serves, women as well as men. I served for 15 years. 5 years active duty, 10 years reserves. Everybody serves, and I'll tell you something. If you cannot conduct constructive conflict in battle, you're going to die. You're not going to lose profitability, you're going to die. Stephen Covey Sr., the father who recently passed, said that most people do not listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. Think about that. How often do you listen and halfway through you start formulating your answer even though you didn't hear the whole thing? Here's another challenge question for you. What do you do when you have an idea, you're in an argument, bless you, you're having an argument, and all of a sudden you have an idea that would help the other person in the argument. Do you tell them? No, right? But maybe they're right. Maybe you just made their point. We typically don't. We won't tell them, but we should. Aristotle had a great statement. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. Patrick Lencioni talks about the opposite of it, politics. What are politics? Politics is when people choose their words and actions based on how they want others to react rather than based on what they really think. We tell people things based on how we want them to react instead of what we really feel. So if we go back to losing culture, you already saw this, and what's happening to companies? Here's what I found. At the climate level, what happens to companies is they lose the autonomy, the employees lose the accountability, they increase bureaucracy, the employees increase COIA. They lose the ability in teams to conduct constructive conflict, and instead what they start practicing is office politics. That is what happens to companies when they grow. Let's go back to our policy manual. To make sure that this does not happen, we're going to write 8 new policies, and they are: leaders must give followers autonomy, leaders must reduce bureaucracy, leaders must inspire their followers, followers must be inspired by their leaders. It says so in the policy manual, and it is the innovation policy manual. Followers must take ownership, followers must not exhibit CYA. Team members must use constructive conflict, and team members must not engage in office politics. Can we write this policy?
Yes.
Thank you. Is it worth the paper we're writing it on? No, it does not. Let's go one level, let's dig one level below. Remember, 91.7% of our iceberg is below the surface. So we're just starting to scratch down. Behaviors, back to our iceberg. The behaviors are, we're going to start on the leadership side, shielding and risk-taking. Here's another story. My older daughter used to be a gymnast. She was a gymnast for 14 years. Now she's a gymnastics coach while she's going to college. And one day in one of her meets, one of her state meets, I sat next to the father of one of her friends, another teammate. And I didn't know him. I asked him, we introduced ourselves. My name is Yoram, my name is Ed. We shook hands. So you're Megan's dad? Yes, I'm Maya's dad. See, that one doing really, really good on floor. I wanted to say better than your daughter, but no. And so, where do you work? This is the obvious question we ask, right? After we know the name, where do you work? It's not what inspired you today. No, where do you work? Alliance Data. I said, so what are you doing in Alliance Data? And he said, I'm the head cheerleader. By the way, that's not a picture of him. I'm the head cheerleader. What do you think he does in the company? He's the CEO. He was the CEO. I didn't know that Alliance Data was a $6 billion company. This was the CEO. I mean, he was wearing a sweatshirt and sweatpants, and I didn't see the Porsche parked outside. That was Ed Heffernan. We became friends. But it struck me that his answer was not, I'm the chief executive officer and chairman of the board and president. His answer was, I'm the head cheerleader. Didn't think much of that story until a few months later. I attended an executive team meeting in another company. And during that meeting, the CEO, it's another company, another technology company, the CEO started hammering on all the other executives in that room. Why they're disappointing him and they're not doing exactly what he tells them to, and things must change here, around here, and I'm going to hold you all accountable. And it went something like this. And after that meeting was over, I was more of an observer. I went to his office and I asked him, why did you do that? Why did you come so hard on your executives? Those are the executives. They're named on Yahoo as executives of the company, as insiders. Why did you do that? And his answer was, because I am the CEO, not a goddamn cheerleader. Here's that word again. And that made me do a little research, and I found something really, really fun. And I wrote this article about 3 years later, I think. Here's what it said. There's one word that separates the best CEOs from the worst CEOs. I found that both of them took office as CEOs in their respective companies within 6 months of one another, about 15 years earlier. Amazing. They both became CEOs at just about the same time. The other thing is both companies had a stock price around $14. How better of a comparison do you have? Ed Heffernan took his company from $14 a share to $250 a share by the time I wrote this article in 2015. And his company is one of the best 100 companies to work for in the DFW area. The other CEO took his company from $14 a share all the way to its bankruptcy. One word separates the best CEOs from the worst CEOs, and that's a cheerleader. The image that I have on the left, Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, that's another amazing story. If you think about industries that are really hard to innovate in and they're really very formalized in structures, one of the first industries that come to mind is the defense industry. It's very hard to do anything, to be innovative, to have the autonomy that you want. Yet, this is the group that's responsible for the P-38, the first American fighter jet, the P-80 Shooting Star, the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 spy plane that flies 3 times the sound of speed, the F-117 stealth fighter. All of this came from a group where the head of that group, the leader of that group, shielded his group with everything that's happening outside. If you shield your group as a leader, what you will get is you will get risk-taking. They would be willing to take risks. If you are a pass-through leader and you just let all the pressures pass through to your employees, what you get is risk aversion. What about the teamwork side? On the teamwork side, you need to be able to do 3 things. You need to be able to be vulnerable, you need to be able to provide direct feedback, and you need to be receptive to that feedback. Let me show you a few things about vulnerability. I'm going to teach you a few new sentences to use at work. The first one is, I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. I know it was hard. I know. Second one, I was wrong.
I was wrong.
No, come on, seriously. I was
wrong.
I know you were. By the way, if the advanced version of this is, I was wrong and you were right. Now, I know this one is hard, so work with me.
I was wrong and you were right.
I know I was. Third one is, this was my mistake. Now, you have to emphasize the word my. Say it.
This was my mistake.
This is the hardest, but I need you to mean it when you say it. Here's the thing. When you say any of one of those statements, you show vulnerability. You show vulnerability. And you know what the other side needs to do? The other side needs to be able to give you direct feedback. So what you expect is when you say, I was wrong, my reaction should not be, you damn right you were. My reaction was, okay, what do we do next? I need to be able to provide you feedback. I need to be able to tell you that your question was stupid. One of the sentences that I hate the most is, there is no such thing as a stupid question. Yes, there is. 80% of mine are stupid, and I'm not the stupidest person on earth. But if I'm going to be afraid to say something because it might come across as stupid, I'm not willing to be vulnerable. And you know what? If I say something that's stupid, I want you to tell me, this was stupid, and tell me why. And I promise I'll be receptive. I'm going to accept it, and I'm not going to take it as a personal attack on me. Here are the things you should stop saying. Next time, ask first. This is not, or this is, how we do things around here. Can tell you how many times I heard that one. There is no such thing as a stupid idea or a stupid question, and whose fault was it? Don't do that. Back to our policy guide. Policies 4, leaders must shield their followers. Followers must be willing, you know where this is going. Can I write this? Yes, I can. Is it worth the paper it's written on? No, it still does not. Let me go back to the agenda because I promised you, we talked about, is it about resources? No, it's not. Is it about technologies? No, it's not. Is it about processes? No, it's not. It is about culture, and it is about something that I'm about to share with you right now. Because you see, for you to be able to give me the autonomy, something must be there first. For you to be willing to be vulnerable with me, something needs to be there first. For you to be willing to give me direct feedback, something needs to be there first. And for you to be receptive for my feedback and not take it as a personal attack, something needs to be there first, and that thing is trust. Let me ask you, what is the difference between trusted and trustworthy? We're in a university, you can answer. And remember, there is no such thing as, no, there is. What is the difference between trusted and trustworthy? Yes?
Trusted, you've earned it, and trustworthy, you have the qualities of it.
Okay, trusted, you've earned it. Trustworthy is you have the qualities. Anyone else? Yes?
I would say trusted is based on experience, based on previous experience, and trustworthy might be based on the experience of others.
Okay, let me ask you a question. To be considered trustworthy, what are you willing to do? How far are you willing to go to be considered trustworthy?
Fail. I'm willing to fail.
You're willing to fail. Thank you. What else? What are you willing to do? Not what you need to do. What are you willing to do? What's the hardest thing? Would you give up $1 million to be considered trustworthy? There was a study in 2017 by David Horsager who claimed that 75% of Americans answered this question. Are you willing, if there are two options, one is you get $1 million, the other is you will be considered trustworthy. If you get the $1 million, you will never be considered trustworthy. 75% of Americans said, I would be trustworthy. Here's a quote from me. Trying to solve innovation processes, cultures, instead of trust is just like attacking the symptoms instead of the problem. Trust has other values than innovation culture. And that is, for example, tell me if you like any of those. 74% less stress, 106% more energy, 29% more satisfaction, 40% less burnout, 50% higher productivity, and 76% more engagement. Anybody here who does not want any of those? Okay, we're good. Plus, about 4 times the performance if you have trust in this organization. So trust is important. I did a survey. Actually, the survey is still open. I'm still collecting more and more inputs, but I already have statistically significant results for you to share. This question, would you buy from a trustworthy salesperson even if his or her price was higher? So I actually asked a very detailed question, and it gave you 2 scenarios. There are 2 projects. There's a project that you want to do. You narrowed it down to 2 possible contractors. We're talking about a $10,000 worth of project, and we're getting 2 people to come in. One of them is very trustworthy, and I demonstrated what trustworthy means. The other one was untrustworthy. Who would you choose? So in terms of percentages, you will notice that not 100% even said that they would take at the same price. If they're both asking $10,000, not even 100% said that they would choose from the trustworthy one. So there are a few that just said, this is not really clear, I'm not sure. Very small percentage. However, exactly the same percentage that said, I will choose the trustworthy salesperson, would still choose the trustworthy salesperson if the price was 10% higher. More than 50% would still choose that trustworthy salesperson if the price was 20% higher, and almost 20% would still choose that one if the price was 50% higher, 15,000 compared to 10,000. We still have close to 20% who said we will choose the trustworthy one. However, I want you to look at the red as well, because the red is I'm not sure. You will notice that only when we got to 50%, we had just over 20% of the people saying none of them. I want the trustworthy, I'm not willing to buy from the non-trustworthy one, but I'm not willing to pay 50% more. It's only over 20%. If you look at, and then you have just under 20% saying that we will choose the low price one, even though we don't feel that they're trustworthy. The interesting part is if you integrate and you say, you know, where you have here the not sures are kind of, we're there. We got you to the point where you're not sure. So let's just say that that's 50-50, and we'll split those in 50. What we get is that 44% would choose the trustworthy one. I'm sorry, not 44%. We will pay up to 44% higher if we're buying from a trustworthy salesperson. Another interesting thing is, I would have thought that women would put a higher margin, a higher premium on trustworthiness, and it turned to be the other way around. Men did more. Don't know why, did not interview people yet, but those are the answers. So how do we start trust? Ernest Hemingway say the best way to know if you can trust someone is to trust them. Because you see, you have this reciprocal relationship as well. If you trust someone, they act in a way that justifies that trust. And if they act in a way that justifies that trust, you trust them. It's a cycle. This works in the overall innovation cycle, because the innovation cycle starts with management trusting the employees, giving them the autonomy. That autonomy leads to creativity. Creativity goes to implementation. That trust that management has in employees is needed to invest in implementation. Then you have innovation, then you have financial results, and the financial results justify the initial trust. Back to our policy manual. Leaders must trust their followers, followers must trust their leaders, team members must trust each other. Can we write this policy? Yes, we can. Is it worth the paper it's written on? No. You cannot force anyone to trust. And this is where I came up with what I call trust actions. And trust actions has 6 elements, and this is what I'm going to talk about. But first of all, you need to know that trust is not developed in a group. Trust develops one-on-one and actually develops differently in different directions. So if, for example, you have 3 people, there are 6 trusting relationships between them. Another thing to know is that trust is also transferable. So if A trusts B and B trusts C, then A trusts C. And if C trusts B and B trusts A, then C trusts A. Maybe not 100%, but they do. The other thing is, when I started working on my trust actions formula and model, what I realized is there are 2 types of elements. There are the contextual elements on one side, and there are the interactional or transactional elements. And what really happens is, we may be building trust here today. Maybe we're building it, maybe we're lowering it. But we get to a certain level of trust, and between now and our next interaction, our next meeting, or our next email, or our next phone call, between those times, trust erodes a little, just a little. So if we're not meeting someone for a long period of time, even if it's someone that last year we trusted very much, this year we are not sure. We're not as sure as we were last year. So I'm going to separate them. There are contextual elements on the left side, and there are transactional elements on the right side. On the left side, we have competence, shared values, and fairness. I'll talk about each one of them. The transactional, we have time, intensity, and positivity. The contextual elements are the ones that carry between interactions. And those are static, those are slow to change, and they happen outside of a meeting as well. One of the best definitions I heard for the word brand is what people think about you, what people say about you when you're not in the room. Brand is part of competence. On the transactional side, those are dynamic, those are fast changing. They change within a meeting or within an interaction. They happen inside of meeting, and they change. They're marginal and incremental in the level of trust. Can you quantify trust? So in one of my books that's over there on the table, I created this formula, but that was the original formula. By then, the formula developed to this. I'm not kidding. It's a serious formula, and it is a working formula. But we're not going to spend time on this. What I want to talk about is the different elements, because it's more important for us right now to understand the different elements. So let's start with competence. Competence is professional, it's technical, it is relative, it is your brand, and believe it or not, you can be over competent. I know it sounds weird, but think about working in a team with a group of people where one of them is like a world class in their job, in their position. It's a little hard to work with that person. And I'm not talking about that person having the personality of a hero, but it's just because that person is so higher up that we stay far from them. So you can actually be overcompetent, but you have to be competent. Shared values. I want you to do something. Do a little exercise for me. So I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I know some of you may not find another person, and I want you to do this. Find, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds for this, find what is the craziest thing that you have in common with the person sitting next to you. 30 seconds starting now.
I had in my consulting, had a company as the client. They were all Jewish. And the first time I met with the board, I wasn't sure I could work with them. They were shouting at each other, and they were rude. But then I realized they don't mean it personally.
Yeah, it's
Maybe
not
it's
personal.
a cultural thing with Jewish people. And even with a lot of Jewish businesses are just a man and his wife. And they'll shout at each other, but it doesn't matter.
Okay, that's 30 seconds. That's all I'm giving you. So, who has something crazy? Who has something crazy? Okay. What do you?
We have children.
You have children. There's someone in every group. What's something crazy that you find? What's something unique that you found?
We both found, she does something really fun, skydives, I guess, or has, but I didn't have that in common. We both went to Europe, and just happened that we've both seen someone mugged in Europe, which is not.
You're both seeing someone in Europe?
Yeah, when I saw someone mugged.
Are you both seeing the same person?
One was in France and one was in Italy.
This would be weird to find this here. Wait, really? Are you dating him too? This is, I only gave you 30 seconds. Imagine what you would find if I gave you 5 minutes, if I gave you 10 minutes, if I gave you an hour. Because here's the thing. I want you to think about being on a trip to China. Okay? Anybody here speaks Chinese? Okay, other than you. You don't understand a word that people say around you because they speak Chinese. And all of a sudden you hear someone speaking English. What do you feel about that person? There is something we have in common. And then you go to that person, you ask, hey, how are you? Where are you from? And she says, I'm from the state of?
Texas.
She's from Texas. Where in Texas? From Dallas. What school did you go to?
UTD.
When in elementary school. You didn't go to UTD in elementary school. Doesn't remember. She doesn't remember what. But we went to the same school. What do you feel towards that person? This is very simplistic, but this is part of what shared values are. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but there are universal values. Take integrity, for example. Anybody here does not think that integrity is an important value to have? Anybody here that has the guts to say that they don't think that? Okay, so integrity, ethics, I really want to know that you care about me. They're universal values, but there are some individual values that, you know what, I may care about and you might not. Like being on time, like having your laptop open in a meeting. Do you use your laptops during meetings? How many of you use their laptops during meetings? Quite a few of us. How many of you are annoyed by people using their laptops during meetings? You know, the weirdest things is sometimes you get the same people. But you're doing this. So not everybody used their laptop and not everybody is annoyed by it. So if you're using your laptop during a meeting and I'm a person that's annoyed by it, that's going to be a problem. That's not a shared value. But if you're annoyed by it as much as I do and neither one of us uses it, we're good. And by the way, if you're not annoyed by it and I'm not annoyed by it and we both use our laptop, that's good too. But those are shared values. And then the others are interpersonal. And sometimes interpersonal, we are on the same team and we may have the same enemy. And the enemy might be budget, might be our boss, might be our competitor, might be anything, might be the stress we're under, the schedule. A common enemy is a shared value, an interpersonal shared value. So back to this, fairness is important as well. And by fairness, what I mean is fairness is structural, a structural element. And this is, are we spending the same amount of work? Are we investing the same amount of work? And if you think about it for a second, think about being part of a team where the other team member works from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. because we're under a tight schedule, and at 6 p.m., at 10 p.m. he goes home and he comes back on weekends, but I show up at 9 and I leave at 5, and I don't want to hear from anybody after 5, and definitely not during the weekend. What do you think the other person would feel? Fairness? No. I'll skip a few because I want to go through the rest of them. Time, the amount of time that we spend together, and not to mention, nobody gets a second chance to make a first impression. The first impression that you have is the most important time that you have with the other person to build or destroy trust, any level of trust. Intensity. Again, I want to do a little exercise with you, and what I wanted to show you is a video that was created in 1944, long before there was video, so this was actually a movie. I want you to tell me what you see there. What is happening there? I want you to describe the emotions, the feelings that you see here. What's happening? Just shout it out. Oop. What do you think about the big triangle? Bully. I heard this word a lot. What do you think about the small one? Scared. How about the circle? Scared too. How do you know it's a he? He's scared. What's happening now? Is this a good situation or not? This is not good. Whoop. What's happening? What is the circle feeling? I'm glad that makes you happy. And that's why we have insurance. So tell me, what are the emotions that you saw there? I heard bully, I heard anger, I heard fear, right? Yes? Yes, definitely. So let me explain this to you. Those are three geometric shapes. They have no feelings. They moved around because the animators made them move around. They can't think, they can't be bullies, they can't be bullied, yet you allocated emotions to them. There were no words in that video. Nobody said anything. You just looked at it. Back in 1971, Albert Mehrabian published a book called Silent Messages. And in his book, he coined what's called the 738-55 rule. And what the 738-55 rule says is that 7% of our meaning comes through words, 38% through tone, 55%, we refer to it as body language, but his research really said our facial expression. So if you can't remember this, just remember the acronym of words, tone, and facial. It takes a while. So if our meeting is over email, if our interaction is over email, we do not get more than 7%. If it's over a call, not a conference call, we can get 45% because you have voice and words, tone and words. At 100%, you get a face-to-face meeting, so you can see my facial expression as well as my tone and as well as my voice, my words. You can get more with 120% for team building activities. Now, in between them, you have things like voicemail and video mail and large meeting where you don't just go one-on-one. Remember, trust is being built one person versus another. When you have a larger meeting, it's slower to build trust. Paul Zak would say that a handshake and hug, this is, by the way, why I'm a hugger, so please don't go a me too on me. I'm a hugger because I'm a hugger and because hugging and handshakes release oxytocin. that makes us feel more trusted and trustworthy. Life-altering event. Why is there so much innovation coming out of Israel? Military service. The level of trust that's being developed when we are, especially when we're in a combat, there's nothing that compares to that. The trust that I have to people that I served with, because I knew that I trusted my life with their hands and they trusted theirs in mine. That level of trust you will hardly ever find in a meeting, but at least you know what will take you there. The last one is positivity, the positivity of the relationship. I'll not go too deep into this one, but positivity, there's something called the critical positivity factor or the Losada ratio. And that is the number that you will find on the internet is 2.9013. And what they say is that you will respond 3 times stronger, or 2.9013 stronger, to negative things than to positive things. The best way to describe it is if I tell you who I share a birthday with. Because I share a birthday with Elvis Presley, David Bowie, Stephen Hawking, all of them dead unfortunately. The one that's still alive is Kim Jong-un. You responded 3 times worse. Okay. Back to trust actions. Now I want to show you how you build an innovation culture. And I'll tell you something, I'll share with you something. When I started, companies would invite me to help them find the next big thing. And the thing is, I would sit with them and we'll talk about technology, sometimes we'll talk about processes, and I'd find that it is almost futile. It just doesn't work. And so today when a company comes to me and says, help us find the next big thing, I say, I'm not starting there. What I'm starting with is let's find out what level of trust do we have. Let's build that trust, because if we build that trust, you're going to have the right behaviors. If you have the right behaviors, you're going to have the right climate. The right climate will give you the motivation to be creative. With that, you can use the processes, and then through ideation, use the tools, use the technology, and find the next big thing. This is how you find the next big thing. You do not start with, let's find what we can do with blockchain. You do not start with, let's use design thinking. You start by building trust. And I see that quite a few of you are taking photos of a picture that is in your handout. I'm going to skip this part. I will just tell you that my group right now is working on developing an app that would allow to track trust and how trust is being developed in an organization and show us where we have issues. And we're back to the last policy, policy 6. Ignore policies 1 through 5. There is no way you can enforce them. Do not fix anything through policy. Policies do not fix things. Climate does. One of the things that I'm doing right now is talking to a lot of organizations in different aspects, because this formula that I showed you only briefly, but just so that you know, I'm not keeping anything from you. The full formula is here on the handout as well. I'm working, and I have a white paper that actually I can share with you pretty quickly on 18+ rule to becoming a trustworthy team player. Here are the things that you need to do to become a trustworthy team player based on this formula. Now, it doesn't have to be team player. It can be a trustworthy leader, trustworthy salesperson, brand, service provider, trustworthy in every relationship. You know, when I look at this formula and I look at the relationship that I have with my wife, who we have been married for just over 25 years now, I see those elements there. And there are 18+1 things that we do. Actually, we don't do the +1. How to become a trustworthy government. Do you know that back in the late 60s, we used to trust our government. 77% of US citizens said that we trust the government, the federal government, to do the best things for us most of the time or all the time. 77%, the number now is 19. I'll give you an example of one. Don't agree to disagree. I hate the statement, let's agree to disagree. Why do we agree to disagree? It's not a hypothetical question.
Because we can't always reach consensus.
Because we can reach a consensus, so let's just agree to disagree. Now, I'm not the stupidest person on earth. I'm threatening him. Are you? You're not the stupidest person on earth. If you hold an opposite position to mine, and we're both not the stupidest people on earth, there must be something that I'm missing. Maybe it's something that you're missing. And if we say, let's agree to disagree, we just miss that element. And you know, I'm actually an elected official. I was elected to the board of the Plano ISD, Plano Independent School District. I'm the board vice president. One of the things that you find is that we agree to disagree on a lot of things. And one of the reasons the other 6 trustees are very annoyed with me is because I don't let them do that. When we disagree on something, I want to know, I truly want to know why you are holding an opposite position. Because my starting point is I'm missing something here. Because you're not stupid and I'm not stupid. And if you think something opposite than me, you must know something that I don't. And if you don't, if I know something that you don't, at least now we know. Okay, I want you to take out your phone and text the word trustworthy to 33222, or if you have an iPhone, all you have to do is just open the camera app, because the camera app will let you scan this and will send me this text, and as a response it's going to ask you to sign up, and you will get I think it's a 5-page paper on 18+1 rules to becoming a trustworthy team member. Free of charge. I'm sorry, some of you still have the phone. Isn't it cool how this works, that it's part of the camera app now? Okay, now, the silver bullet. There is a silver bullet here, and I'm almost done. The silver bullet is start building trust in the leadership team. And the reason for that is because that's where you get the biggest bang for your buck. The leadership team controls the largest amount of resources. Trust and inspiration flow downwards. Now, it's not an easy task. Sometimes it feels like this.
This man right here is my great-grandfather. He's the first cat herder in our family. Herding cats. Don't let anybody tell you it's easy. Anybody can herd cattle. Holding together Tim's bellow and half wild short hair. But that's another thing altogether. Being a cat herder is probably about the toughest thing I think I've ever done.
I got this one this morning, right here. And if you look at his face, his thing is ripped to shreds, you know?
You see the movies, you hear the stories. I'm living the dream. Not everyone can do what we do.
I wouldn't do nothing else.
It ain't an easy job, but when you bring a herd into town and you ain't lost to one of them, you ain't feeling like in the world.
Thank you. You want to have some questions? Or?